It can be a frustrating experience to encounter statements of belief which seem to run contrary to the evidence before us, or worse, to basic principles of human compassion or dignity. For example, take a look at some of these quotes that one can easily find around the internet from prominent individuals. This is Osama bin Laden bragging about how his organization, Al-Qaeda, loves death as much as the US loves life. Or here is James Dobson from Focus on the Family asserting that homosexual marriage will destroy the earth. Here is Israeli Rabbi Ovadia Yosef suggesting that natural disasters are caused by insufficient Bible study. What is going on here? You look at these and you wonder, how is it possible that normal individuals could ever think this? Are these people abnormal? Are they stupid? Are they insane? Are they abnormally cruel, looking for excuses to be so? And perhaps more importantly than how, what should we do about these people? What is to be done? In the words of one of my colleagues, should we just populate their areas with giant cats? These are bigger questions than I think I can answer here, but what I can do is try to offer some perspective on what exactly religious extremism is. When I talk about a religion, I'm talking about a cultural system consisting both of beliefs about the world and a set of practices or behaviors which serve to symbolize and strengthen group identity. As we know, religions usually seem to involve deities or other supernatural powers and usually seem to contain some sort of moral code. Extremism, on the other hand, doesn't require deities or necessarily anything supernatural. It is an ideology or social political act that lies very far outside the political center of a society. Extremists tend to have an uncompromising categorical worldview. Right and wrong are very clear to them, true and false, and the world is divided into us and them being the enemy, and the enemy being something to mistrust greatly. Suffice it to say, these beliefs sometimes seem extremely disconnected from reality. Take this image for example. What do you see here? Well, it could be a piss take, Poe's law, but it does seem to show a certain combination of religion, politics, categorical thinking, and violence. Less of a piss take would be this. These children are members of the Iranian Basij. That was a civilian militia that was raised during the Iran-Iraq War, and these children were used as human mine clearers or as human waves to throw at Iraqi lines. The headbands you see them wear contain religious slogans. There are some psychological observations we can make on religious extremists. They tend to have a strong group identity. They tend to have uncompromising moral views. They tend to perceive themselves to be oppressed. They have a sense of progressive social degradation. And they see tradition as the proof against further degradation or the return to those good old days. I can think of a parallel to these sorts of features, and that is in the explorations on the psychology of terrorists. This model by Fathali Moghadam looks at the move from regular thinking towards a sort of radical mindset that permits terrorist violence as a staircase, one where each higher floor, one can stop there, one can move further up the staircase, and on each floor there are various psychological mechanisms or behaviors or thinking patterns which denote a further shift towards extreme views, towards the assimilation of norms or methods or goals which really require a sort of brutality and suspension of empathy that most people can't do. If you take a look at this chart by Macaulay and Moskalenko, you can see that the various mechanisms that lead to radicalization or political extremism can range from the very personal to the level of mass society or politics. Not only that, but they don't always involve things that are necessarily tied up with a sense of threat or a sense of grievance. Very typical social psychological mechanisms like the group extremity shift, where individuals tend to adopt a more extreme version of whatever position the majority of the group held on the outset of the discussion, or the seductive power of love or friendship, or just simply a slippery slope factor. All of these can lead to people of normal psychology developing very abnormally horrible views. If we go to the literature, and I don't mean the holy literature, I do mean the psychological literature, we can see a few conclusions start to emerge. It is the overwhelming consensus of psychologists who study radicalism that religious radicals or terrorists or what have you are psychologically normal even when they commit violence. And that group identity dynamics are particularly important. So if you take one of the fundamental theories of group identity, social identity theory, you start to see some kind of explanation as to how people can have beliefs that run contrary to what we consider to be good critical thinking. The basic principles of SIT are that individuals first identify as part of a group, and then only then do they identify as an individual. And in order to develop good individual self-esteem, people develop a sense of group esteem. They think that their group is good and better than other groups, or has certain special features that make it worthy of esteem. And in situations of intergroup conflict, in order to bolster the esteem of a certain group that may be experiencing social or economic hardship, often the norms or positions of the group will be one that scapegoats another group, however reasonable or unreasonable that may be. And as groups become more and more extreme, you might wonder why it is that people don't start to realize that actually these group norms, these group beliefs are ridiculous. Well, these groups can offer compelling explanations, or at least comfortable explanations, for an unpleasant state of affairs, and they can offer paths to prestige within the group. And these things lead to very powerful external and internal pressures upon individuals within a group to continue to accept, to embrace the norms and goals of the group. Furthermore, in situations of greater intergroup conflict, and as intergroup conflict increases, group identity becomes more and more prime in occupying an individual's attention. So empathy and individual considerations like compassion are suppressed in favor of pro-group action and operation on group norms. Cognitive dissonance is a relevant concept to consider here because let's say that you have different identities, because identities aren't like hats. People wear several at once. And one identity might be that you are a critically thinking and compassionate individual, and another might be that you're, shall we say, a radical Islamist or a radical Marxist. Well, sometimes if these identities come into conflict, requiring you to accept contradictory beliefs, you can enter into a very uncomfortable state, which is cognitive dissonance. You can't assert P and not P simultaneously. And that is why, as I'm sure many of us are aware, a lot of extremist individuals or very religious individuals tend to compartmentalize well. They can be very critically thinking, compassionate people in one sense, and quite dogmatic, hardline uh, people in another sense. And they've simply managed to avoid these divergent modes of operating from coming into contact with one another. So what conclusions can we draw from this sort of very brief survey? Well, we can conclude that the role of identity and of social processes are prime in determining whether people have beliefs that appear stupid, cruel, and insane. In other words, religious extremism, and that religious extremists are not necessarily predisposed, essentially, or in terms of their regular psychology, towards stupidity, cruelty, or insanity. We can also say that religious extremism has a social, political, and historical context, and this context is often one of conflict, competition, and insecurity. There are some practical suggestions I can make in light of these things for having conversations with religious extremists or having conversations about religious extremism. In conversation, do emphasize compassion as it's non-threatening. Make generous use of the Socratic method in conversation as it can highlight a person's inconsistent views without, again, having a threatening kind of assertiveness. And bring in your own lived experience if you can, because stimulating empathy in people degrades the categorical us-them values or us-them boundaries. And don't treat extremists as though they are stupid, cruel, or insane. It's belittling. It doesn't win you any points. It's not going to work very well. And as a general rule, don't behave aggressively or angrily in discussions with extremists. And finally, don't accept simple explanations for how and why extremist beliefs arise. And a major principle that I really suggest that you follow: do not generalize the beliefs of any one group of extremists to anyone else. As we've said, these beliefs arise from a very specific context, and it would be wrong to assume that those beliefs have arisen due to the same situations or the same context in other people.